Jeremy, you're live.
Do we want to wait until 7 to start? Yeah, all right. We'll just give it a couple more minutes for folks to trickle in and then we'll get the program started. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm just giving it another minute or so until we start the program and for folks to trickle in. So appreciate your patience. Thank you. Shout out to Will Thomas. I see on the screen. It's nice to see you, Will. All right, we're going to get started. Hi, folks. I'm Jeremy Love. I'm National Field Organizer with Back from the Brink and former board member of New Hampshire Peace Action. And I'm excited to welcome you to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online for April 22nd, introducing students for nuclear disarmament and the youth working for nuclear abolition. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all, based upon cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security lead to a more peaceful and just global community. In the spirit of respect and love, we'd like to start with an acknowledgement that we're doing our work on Nagingkina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We honor with gratitude the land, waterways, and the people who have lived in relationship throughout generations here. Quick reminder on Zoom guidelines. We love when you keep your video on, but ask that you keep your audio muted and use the chat to ask questions or raise your hand using the feature in Zoom. We're going to hear from our speaker first and then move to Q&A. Please use the chat for initial questions, and later we'll have folks raise their hands to be called upon to join the conversation or ask questions. Earlier, I referenced the 40 plus years that New Hampshire Peace Action has been at this work. And while all of it has been in service of achieving, in the greatest sense, peace, the specific foci of New Hampshire Peace Action varies from year to year. As U.S. involvement in violent international conflict is almost always a constant at some level, direct U.S. engagement in violence fluctuates, and new conflicts arise to our attention as less timely issues fall from our attention. But a persistent focus of the work in which New Hampshire Peace Action and its membership is engaged tirelessly for more than 40 years, full stop, has been the abolition of nuclear weapons. Demonstrative of New Hampshire Peace Action's commitment to this work is their participation in Back from the Brink as a coalition partner, which gives us a seat on the coalition steering committee, and the help they are always willing to lend is serving as a home base, so to speak, for the New Hampshire Back from the Brink hub. With that, I'm excited to introduce our guest for tonight's program. Rishi Gurudevan is a junior at Phillips Exeter Academy. He's graduating 2025 and a former U.S. Senate page appointed by Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire. He's the founder and a steering committee member of Students for Nuclear Disarmament, a national nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness among Gen Z about the threats that nuclear weapons pose to humanity and uniting young people and urging the U.S. government to pursue common sense nuclear weapons policy, an effort which began right here in the Granite State. So please join me in welcoming Rishi, co-founder of Students for Nuclear Disarmament.
Thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate, so much the opportunity to speak to you all today, and to those watching on the live stream, and to those faces that I recognize from our rally this weekend. I appreciate you being here. It was a really great experience to work with you, who were there. Boots on the ground, people doing that. That's the real grassroots work that makes change. So I applaud everyone who made the trip to Concord this past weekend. So yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I'll probably go on for about 10 to 20 minutes, just talking about my story, where Students for Nuclear Disarmament came from, and then sort of how you guys, as residents of New Hampshire, but adult residents of New Hampshire, can help youth get involved in this movement and help us achieve some concrete change. So yeah, I already stated my name is Rishi Gurudevan. 16 years old, and I live in New York City over the summer, but I'm a boarding school student at Phillips Exeter Academy. So I've adopted the Granite State as my home over the past 3 years. And yeah, I've really come to love the community in this state. Yeah, I haven't seen, I've lived in New York City and Los Angeles in my life, and I've never, those are very big places with, sometimes get lost in the masses, and I've never seen, quite such a tight-knit community who really cares about each other as I have in New Hampshire. So I'm really glad to be doing this work here. And I think, there's no better place for a global youth nuclear disarmament movement to have started. So I first learned about this issue, not even a year ago. Or not learned about it, but I first became impassioned about the issue not even a year ago. It was just go to show, the immense power and influence we can have on people to make a change in a very short amount of time. So Dr. Ira Helfand, who is also graduated from Exeter back in 1967, is a board member of Back from the Brink, and he, one of the co-founders. He's worked on the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2017, as well as IPPNW. He's been doing this work for a long time. The way he came and gave a lecture at my school, just laying, and he actually did that again this year for today, and I helped to run that, which was really exciting. Just laying out for 15 to 20 high school students, what the real threats of a nuclear war are, what the untold destruction that would result from even a small scale nuclear war to a large scale nuclear war, and something notable is that he has all of these really gruesome figures just memorized off the top of his head. So just in the spirit of that, I chose not to use slides today because I feel like, having a conversation with people just face to face is oftentimes more impactful. But yeah, that lecture last year really, really, frankly, scared me. And fear is an emotion that I think it plays a really integral role in what we're trying to do as nuclear disarmament activists. And I've talked to a lot of people about having a balance between a healthy dose of hope and fear. Especially among my generation, we haven't lived through, Hiroshima and Nagasaki or the Cuban Missile Crisis or anything that happened, during the Cold War. And as such, we've been lulled into a false sense of security about nuclear weapons. And frankly, there's not enough fear to go around about, the untold calamities that could result from a nuclear war. And so part of our mission, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, as Students for Nuclear Disarmament, is to inspire a little bit of that fear in people, not to the extent that that it grows into panic, but instilling a sense of urgency in my generation that really doesn't exist now. That's why I'm doing this, and that's why I'm here speaking to you today. So after that lecture that Dr. Helfand gave, the capstone of our U.S. history curriculum at Phillips Exeter is to write a 20-page research paper on any topic of our choice. And after hearing about nuclear weapons, I decided to do a little bit more reading and came across the nuclear freeze movement, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and perhaps even played a part in. But for those of you who don't know, the nuclear freeze movement was a national grassroots movement across the world, but particularly prominent here in the United States during the early 1980s, late 1970s. That culminated in the largest protest in American history. That figure is debated, but there was over 1 million people protesting in Central Park, protesting the nuclear arms race between the United States and Soviet Union. And my thesis in that paper was that, in Ronald Reagan's first term in his presidency, he was a extremely pro-nuclear weapon, pro-defense spending president. As many of you know, he tried to pioneer this initiative called Star Wars, or the Strategic Defense Initiative, and he was very much, for peace through strength was the doctrine that really defined his presidency. But in his second term, he had a complete 180 on his nuclear weapons policy. And ended up signing the momentous INF treaty with Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union. And so what I argued in that paper was that no, that didn't just happen overnight magically. There were millions of people going out there doing the grassroots work, just like we did this weekend, making that difference happen. And ordinary people like you and me, history tells us that they're the ones who made change, not U.S. presidents suddenly having an epiphany after watching a movie. Although that's the story that's told to a lot of people, that Ronald Reagan saw, I believe, the day after, and he was like, "Oh my God, nuclear weapons are bad." No, that's not all that it was, right? There were millions of people putting in the work to try to convince our government leaders, and it's honestly sad, right? That ordinary people have to take time off from tending to their families, doing their jobs, living their lives to convince our government leaders of such something that we see as so common sense. But that's what had to be done in the 1980s, and that's what has to be done today. And so after writing that paper, I was interested in what sort of activism was going on today, right? Because nuclear weapons haven't disappeared since the 1980s. We've achieved significant reductions in the world's nuclear forces, but they're definitely not gone, right? There are over 12,000 nuclear warheads in existence today. And so I started doing some research, and I came across the fact that yes, nuclear disarmament activism still is going on strongly, um, although it's just not covered in the media anymore, as it should be. And the one issue that I saw that that I wanted to solve is that I didn't see a prominent youth component to the movement. And Students for Nuclear Disarmament was born from a philosophy that resonates with many movements. And I was inspired by Ella Baker and the civil rights movement and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as well as Greta Thunberg of the climate change movement. All of these young voices, young people, which have driven successful social movements. I saw that's a critical piece that's missing from the 21st century nuclear disarmament movement. And it's my firm belief that if we're going to achieve concrete change, as with all social movements, in some part our movement has to be driven by young people. And I was really fortunate to have an article sort of laying that out, that philosophy out, published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists earlier this month, and I can paste that in the chat for anyone who'd like to give it a read, or send it to anybody you know. But that's sort of the my sort of philosophy over why we need to get young people involved in this movement. And so after sort of figuring out what we wanted to do, I founded Students for Nuclear Disarmament, which as Jeremy mentioned, we're a national nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness among young people about the threat that nuclear weapons pose to humanity, as well as urging the U.S. government to pursue common sense nuclear weapons policy. And over the past almost a year, coming up on our anniversary, we had immense progress, and we've grown to having a presence in 6 states and the District of Columbia, all while being full-time students. This isn't our job, right? Our job is to go to school, do our homework, be kids. But at the same time, there's been so many amazing young people who've, dedicated their time and effort to grow our initiative to the scale it is today. And we've really only just gotten started. And through over the next, couple of months, years, and hopefully in decades, the problem will be solved. That's my look on it. But over the next significant amount of time, we've only just gotten started. We're going to keep growing. We're going to keep inspiring young people in as many places as possible, and hopefully extending at some point beyond the borders of the United States to other countries across the world. And so for what it is we actually do, Students for Nuclear Disarmament's aim is, as I said, twofold. The first is education, and the second is sort of political momentum and pressure. So on the education front, It's nice when teachers, sort of tell things to you and adults sort of tell things to kids. But at the end of the day, the most impactful words that a young person can hear is from another young person, right? So we're sort of training the next generation of leaders and educators, even if they won't be teachers when they grow up, to educate their peers on nuclear weapons and the threat they pose to humanity. And we're accomplishing this in many different ways. A prominent method that we use is just starting clubs at our schools. So I, along with several other students, and oh, I forgot to list the states that we're present in. So we're in New York, California, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Massachusetts, Georgia, the District of Columbia, and we're getting something started in North Carolina. So we've made a lot of progress. But anyway, there's kids, yeah, there's teenagers, high school students, and college students in all those states, starting clubs at their school, to sort of stimulate the discourse around the issue. And that's something we see is really critical to achieving any sort of success. Is that if you look at issues like gun violence or reproductive rights or climate change, even you'll notice that those are all headlines on the news, right? People are talking about those issues, and people are therefore putting pressure on politicians to do something about them. And we're seeing progress, right? We've seen the Inflation Reduction Act, though we still have a long way to go. All those movements have seen concrete change. And we need to make nuclear disarmament part of the same equation, right? We need to get people talking about it like they were in the 1980s. But we can't wait for another, catastrophic or catastrophe or near catastrophe for that to happen. So stimulating discourse is something that we place a firm priority on. We're also using the tools of the 21st century to our greatest advantage. So we're making use of social media in a big way to reach young people, be it Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, things like that. We're trying to expand our presence as much as possible. Something that Randall Forsberg and the other nuclear freeze activists didn't have in the 1980s was a Facebook page, right? They didn't have these tools that we have access to, and we're sort of taking advantage of the opportunity that we have, based on the time that we're in. And I'll be the first to say that there's definitely downsides, to my generation being addicted to their cell phones and TikToks, and I'm guilty of that myself. But we're really trying to take advantage of the fact that our eyes are glued to our screens all the time, and put some good information on those screens. So that's a strategy that we've been making use of. And we're also working on building up a robust website. And a problem that a lot of people have with social media is that it's sort of it's a big hotspot for misinformation because short form content or just little blurbs and videos, aren't really enough to capture the essence of full issues, right? If you just see clippings of news headlines, you might get a completely different picture of what's going on in the world if you than if you were to actually read a full article, right? And that's why our philosophy is using social media to sort of draw people in and then directing them to more robust resources like our website or news articles and things like that. And we pride ourselves on making sure our information is accurate and really trying to defy all the tropes that are common about social media and the bad information that gets spread on it, and use it as a tool for good, because it's going to be a part of our lives, regardless, for the foreseeable future. So we might as well learn how to use the tool effectively. And then the other facet of what Students for Nuclear Disarmament does is our government activism, right? You know this weekend we were out at the, many of you were there, but Students for Nuclear Disarmament was out at the New Hampshire State House, staging sort of a rally, a peaceful demonstration, urging our government leaders to take action on, the Back from the Brink campaign's common sense nuclear weapons policies. But that's not just in New Hampshire, right? There's kids at schools across the country now, all working on a youth-led movement to for our government leaders to do something about this problem. And particular success that we've had is my co-chair, co-member of the steering committee, Eddie Lachey. He couldn't be here with us tonight, but he's from Burbank, California, which, if you don't know where that is, it's a city in Southern California with over 100,000 people in it. So it's a big deal. And he and a group of other high school students at John Burroughs High School, which is just, these are just normal kids. They're everyday kids, just their main job is school, but they say somehow found it in them to convince their mayor to issue a proclamation in support of nuclear abolition. And that's just one example of, the successes we've been having at, the state, local, and federal levels, to get, gather support around this issue, using our youth voices to drive it. And so I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with our petition in New Hampshire, but we've been making some great progress on it even today. Actually, we're urging Congressman Pappas and Congresswoman Custer to sign on to HRS 77. This is a completely youth-led campaign, and we're trying to get as many signatures from New Hampshire residents as possible. So I actually just pasted it in the chat, and it's pretty simple to sign it. You can just click the link and just click. If you want to read the treatise I wrote, go ahead. But you can also just click sign and put in your name and email address, and just like that, we're that much closer to a world free of nuclear weapons. So yeah, petitions like that are popping up all across the country. And we hope to have a meeting with the congressman next month. Congressman Pappas, I'm focusing on him because I live in his district. But there's also students we're working with who live in Congresswoman Custer's district, and she's also retiring. So whoever her successor is, this petition, this call is also addressed to whoever that is. But yeah, and yeah, thanks, Jeremy. That's the bill we're asking them to sign if you're not familiar with it. And yeah, that's about it. I know, yeah, I've taken up about 15, 20 minutes. So if anyone has, I think are we good to do Q&A now? I think
Yeah, absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Rishi. That was really pretty motivating and inspiring. Lots of really great comments about how awesome of a job that you were doing. So I'm happy to see that because I agree. So yeah, so we can open it up for questions. If anybody has any, you're free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will give you the floor accordingly. We have our first hand raiser, Robin.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
We can. Thank you.
You are an inspiration. I'm in Burlington, Vermont, and when you listed the states that have a chapter of your organization, you did not mention Vermont. And so I would like to pick your brain or find out if you know young people here in Burlington or nearby that we could connect with or bring you over to meet with them. We're planning an event in May 19th, of showing the film. It's not the day after, but it's the film that was made about the day after, and it's called Television Event. I don't know whether others here know about that film, but it's kind of inspiring about now we're coming back to the concern about nuclear weapons that people felt back in the day when the day after was made, which you all know was the very dramatic film about a town in Kansas experiencing a nuclear attack. So I just wondered whether you have contacts in Vermont, or maybe we can talk by email or something, but thank you for your inspiring message.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely something, as I mentioned, our main goal over the next few months in is outreach. So unfortunately we don't have contacts in Vermont yet, but I'll put our organization's email in the chat just for everybody, by the way. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and I'd love to offline with anybody who's interested in sort of getting youth activism started in their area. Unfortunately, I'm not in touch with anybody in Vermont as of yet. But if you know, just if anybody on the call just knows, a high school student or a college student, they don't already have to be interested in the issue. But if you could send their contact, sorry, I'm kind of flipping the question on you now, but if anybody has those young people's contact information you think you could be interesting, please send them over to that email right there. We have a monthly meeting of the kids from across the country who sort of we meet to check in and talk about all the work that we've been doing over the past month, as well as welcome in any new voices. But yeah, we have a very sort of, we created sort of an efficient system for, sort of receiving people who are interested and, getting a chapter set up. So if you, we don't, the short answer is we don't have contacts in Vermont right now. But if there were to be, college or high school students interested there, we'd totally, we'd love to have them.
Thank you. Kind of an adjacent question in the chat from Luke is, how do you get a chapter started in a new state where you don't have a personal contact? And that also kind of segues into what was going to be a personal email to Rishi that I'm just going to mention here since we're in the chat, because it's also maybe something to kind of talk about, which I think is really an awesome part of the work that we're doing, or that you're doing, is I just recently made a contact with somebody at Howard University. And that brings up the fact that not only is Students for Nuclear Disarmament working with universities, but specifically has some connections with historically Black college and universities. There's a student that you're working with at Morehouse, if that's correct, right?
Yeah, Jarek from Morehouse, absolutely.
Yeah. So do you want to speak to Luke's question real quick about how do you get a chapter started where you don't have any personal contacts?
Yeah. Is this where I don't have personal contacts or you don't have personal contacts? But
I think it's where anybody doesn't have personal contacts, where they don't exist. Because then, and really, to be honest, the Howard thing is kind of an example of how this happened, because it was somebody who's on our steering committee just happened to kind of know somebody. And it was like, you just have to have the courage to send an email.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also think that this ties into the next question here actually about media coverage. But so so to answer the first question, that's, what Jeremy mentioned is sort of the key to our outreach so far, is the people kind of knowing somebody, perhaps, and, perhaps, send this guy, an email, and maybe something will work out. And we've tried to really capitalize on every single opportunity we have to get someone involved, because, every single person who sort of like, signs a petition or, comes to a rally, that brings us that much closer to our eventual goal. So that's sort of the system we've been operating on right now, as we're still at a small scale. But to answer, the second question about media coverage, we haven't had local media coverage yet, although that's something, we're definitely looking into. I've done a couple of interviews with articles that should be coming out soon. I don't think I'm actually allowed to say the publication yet. But that's definitely something that we're working on in the near future. But to the extent, that bulletin article that I posted, that I was able to publish, that's been our greatest media coverage so far. But yeah, we're definitely, that's definitely something we're considering, and how to get involved on that. But yeah, that's a great question, and I do think getting the media to cover the fact that young people are interested in this issue is going to be key to our growth. So thank you so much for that question.
I could jump in and offer too that Back from the Brink is partnering with Students for Nuclear Disarmament, and due to the success that the campaign's been having with its fundraising and movement building, we were able to recently hire a excuse me, a social media and communications consultant, who part of that work is doing press sort of release stuff and outreach to press. So this is a really good reminder, Barb, to start talking to folks about the potential of outreach to news outlets in New Hampshire, because I would think that this is something that they would want to get a finger on too. Will Thomas has his hand raised. Will.
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can.
Good. Recently I've been hearing or reading about the possibility of some nations considering the use of nuclear weapons, which is very disconcerting, obviously. And specifically Israel. I think there are two officials who have talked openly about nuking Gaza. And I think because of the vote sending more aid to Ukraine. The Russian, I believe, Prime Minister is talking about a possible nuclear confrontation with the West. So how do you address that, Rishi? And by the way, I commend you for your
Thank
energy,
you.
your enthusiasm. I was just looking at a quote very brief, from Martin Luther King. It says, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent
Mm.
about things that matter." Well, thank you for not being silent. So this issue should be front and center. And how do you address that, or have you addressed that?
Yeah, so you're talking about sort of the recent threats against the West? Yeah.
Well, Israel nuking Gaza
Yeah, yeah,
and
or yeah, I'm involved in the West. Yeah. So those are two, very critical conflicts that have, arisen, fairly recently in terms of the history of the whole movement. But I think it's important to sort of capitalize on, as sad it is, we need to capitalize on the fear that may be eliciting in people, right? We need to discuss, contextualize what we're trying to do, contextualize it with current events, right? Sort of saying, if we didn't want, Iran to be on the brink of, creating nuclear weapons, and, Israel, having a far right wing cabinet, threatening to use them on innocent civilians in Palestine, right? Or if we didn't want, Russia to have this, looming threat over Ukraine, things like that. We need to put that, put what we're trying to do in that context, right? Too often is nuclear disarmament pigeonholed as a, far left wing issue, which is, only, which is sort of a threat to U.S. national security, to sort of weaken our defense posture, anything like that. I have lots to say to those people who claim that. But I think the key to reaching any sort of success on this issue is really a political diversity among, the people who support nuclear disarmament, reaching across the aisle to the right, frankly, the Republican Party, which is noticeably absent right now from HRS 77, right? And I think, using these, present dangers that are obviously present and dangerous to everybody, not just, left-wing people and Democrats, right? Using, the power that, these issues have over everybody, to sort of, extend an olive branch of common sense, if you will, across the aisle. I think that's the best way to use what's happening. But I thank you for bringing that up, because that's definitely, seeing it in the news. I talked about, the news media not covering it up, but frankly, in a perfect world, we would never want to see this on the news, right? We wouldn't want to see these things happening on the news. But the fact that they are, that's kind of just, we can't control, what happens, because of what's happened in the past, but we can control what we do with the information now that we have it. So thank you so much for the question.
Amy, did you want to talk about the Veterans for Peace walk? I don't think that that's actually something that I've mentioned to Rishi, so you can kind of take some time to talk about it a little bit and maybe make a soft pitch. I don't know who's I know that I had talked to Pat Scanlon, but then something happened and that they weren't going to do it anymore. So I've kind of lost track of what's going on with it. And yeah.
Yeah, it's coming. And I'm actually I'll say a little bit and then I'm going to ask Will Thomas to follow up. But the Veterans for Peace have a peace walk starting in Maine and going to DC. They'll be in New Hampshire in early May. And we have a bunch of events lined up, including one in Exeter. So this could be a great opportunity to bring some folks together that care about the same things, who have different experiences. And Will Thomas, I happen to know, has a Cuban Missile Crisis story that he might share. Will, can I ask you if you want to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, you can, but can you say also a little bit more about the Veterans for Peace walk, why it's important, what's it focused on, what it is focused on, and how it might connect with students or others. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Yes, I can also put the website. It's well, I'll put it in the chat, but www.peacewalk2024.org. And it does start in Ogunquit, Maine on May 7th. There'll be people there actually on one of the beach, and explaining why they're part of this walk, which will deal with saving our planet from climate crisis, peace, planet, and climate, and including nuclear weapons, ridding the planet of governments of all nuclear weapons. So yeah, the first day will be Ogunquit, leading in Ogunquit to York to Kittery, Maine, and then crossing the Memorial Bridge into Portsmouth on May 7th. And then thereafter, there'll be meetings in mostly, I think it's UU churches, right, Amy? The one in Exeter, UU Church in Hampton, I believe, is another one, and the Dover Friends meeting. So May 7th, 8th, 9th, I believe the 10th, they start to walk into Massachusetts. But the end result will be to, if people so choose, to go to the NATO nations are meeting in Washington, D.C. And I went to one in Chicago when Obama was president, and it was quite powerful, with a lot of Iraq war veterans, Afghan veterans, and even Vietnam throwing their medals actually away to the site where the building that we couldn't get, very close to it. But anyway, so you can check, I'll put the website again on there. But the Cuban Missile Crisis, just briefly, yeah, I was 19 years old, and we discovered the Russians, the Soviets had shipped in nuclear missiles to Cuba with some Russian troops or Soviet troops. So my ship was a helicopter carrier ship, 2/3 the size of an aircraft carrier. Anyway, so we were stationed around the island of Cuba, what they called a quarantine, which is really a blockade. And we knew, and I was with the radar division, we knew there was a Soviet submarine behind us, tailing us. There were 4 of them. Each one had, at that time, 1962, October, a single nuclear missile. I forget what it was. It was 12 maybe kilotons or whatever it was, but not the megatons we have as standard, So this one destroyer captain decided just to let them know we knew they were there. We had destroyers around us. We were a big ship, and so the depth charges were dropped, and apparently one sounded real, and it may have been real to the officers on board the Soviet submarine. So they had lost communication with Moscow, but before they left, they were told, if you do lose communications, if you feel you're being attacked, you may use that missile. So the 2 officers below the captain said, yes, fire. And the 3rd one, whose name was Vasily Erakov, the captain, at the last minute said no. So there's a film called The Man Who Saved the World. Vasily Erakov, and if Will Hawkins were here, who's now the new director of the National Veterans for Peace, said if he had a son, he would name him Vasily after the submarine captain who saved the world. So we've come close. And of course, as most of the people here understand, we've come close several times, more than once. And so that's the fear that, somebody will lose control. And I'm not thinking of a certain president, but anyway. So there you go.
Thank you so much for sharing that, sir, and thank you for your service. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I think sharing stories like those with kids my age who probably the vast majority of us, myself included, before I took, U.S. history class, don't know what the Cuban Missile Crisis was, or, don't know just how close we've come. And, these stories which talk about, the intimate experience of, the regular people who were behind, saving us from worldwide destruction.
But
That can
here's
be a
the
really
thing.
powerful technique.
The
Sorry.
thing, Rishi, is the thing is that John F. Kennedy had 2 young children. The kid of Khrushchev had grandchildren, and they both realized they were so close that they thought about other people. There were people in Kennedy's cabinet who wanted to, a guy named
Absolutely.
LeMay, Curtis LeMay, wanted to bomb, attack Cuba. So good thing we had a president, and the Soviets had a premier who communicated.
Thank you so much for that.
It wasn't anything that Curtis LeMay didn't want to bomb, right? Geez. Rachel has her hand raised. She said, I'm also, let me apologize for the segue to your question being a Colonel, like a Curtis LeMay joke. I'm sorry about that. That's really poor company to force you into. So I apologize.
Hi, I have a question to Will. In addition to what you explained about Cuban Missile Crisis, wasn't it reaction to what the US did, which was the United States placed nuclear weapons in Turkey, aiming at Soviet Union? That was the first action that we did, our country did. So the Cuban Missile Crisis was actually reaction to the United States, right? Yeah, this part I've never learned until recently. So it's been a big, relearning of a history. It seems like a lot of important original action taken by the United States were not fully explained in our history classes. So
Right.
that just wanted to verify that.
Right. One other thing I would say, that those missiles in Turkey were pretty old, apparently. So a deal was made. We would remove those, and they would remove theirs from Cuba. And the other thing was the year before, in April, a place called the Bay of Pigs, where we financed and supported people to oust Castro, and it failed, big failure. And then, of course, part of the deal with Khrushchev was that the United States promised never again to stage an invasion, if you will, in Cuba. Of course, we've sanctioned them for 60 years and denied them, everything possible to make their life miserable. So anyway, there was a deal. So
I also would like to add the fact that in case of Russia, not the Soviet Union, Russia even nowadays, just like the United States, nuclear weapons are at the hair trigger alert, which means they are on the launching pad. But the difference between the United States and Russia is like this. In the US, it's just by the push of that button, his button, who seem to be in his senile nowadays, but it's very, very dangerous. And in case of Russia, as Will explained before, they has to go through 3 different steps. So it's a little bit more secure. In case of China, nuclear warheads are not even on the launching pad, which means that the China's, they've been clearly stating that they will never use nuclear weapons for preemptive purposes. Here, I would like to explain a spin-off project of Peace Walk of Veterans for Peace. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace. I'm also a member of Manhattan Project for a Nuclear-Free World. And since 2016, I've been organizing Peace Speaking Tour in Japan. And this year, I am collecting wood ash samples. If you have any wood fire stove or a regular fireplace, And if you are yet to cleaning after the season, please help me and send me just 4 ounces, which is about a little, sandwich Ziploc bag of amount of wood ash. I can bring it to Japan. I can have a lab test the amount of radiation level. If you are interested in this project, please send me your email. Please email me. I can send you more details. The purpose of this spin-off project is I would like everyone to know how still irradiated this whole nation is. And also we'd like to make a map of the radiation level all across the United States. For example, 4 years ago, I sent my wood ash sample from my stove to Japan. Guess what? They detected 51 becquerels per kilogram. Okay, this is, I live in North Country, very northern tip of Adirondack National Park. And my place is more than 50 miles away from the closest nuclear power plant. But still, 2,000 miles away from nuclear test sites, the trees around here are all still irradiated. So I'm very curious that if I run the same tests all across the United States, the closer it gets to the Utah, California, that area, the 51 could be hundreds or 200s, who knows? So please feel free to send me your information. And for example, by the way, the test fee is $50 per sample, which is not bad. I will put my email address to anyone who's interested in. Please let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. That sounds like a cool project. So Luke had a comment in the chat that I want to talk about real quick. He said, with all the anxiety over artificial intelligence technology, I've heard little discussion of the danger that poses if put in control of nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
My comment is that there has been, while I agree it's little discussion, there have been a couple moments, one of which a New Hampshire peace action well, actually, I don't think he was ever a board member, but he was just a normal member. John Raby had an interaction with Andrew Yang during the presidential campaign for the 2020 election, where he asked Andrew Yang about it, and Andrew Yang ended up tweeting out about that. So I agree, it's definitely not a topic of great discussion, but it has received a little attention. And I'm wondering, Rishi, if you have any thoughts about sort of the dangers of AI and nuclear weapons.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think so. Yeah, I read this book called Cyber Threats and Nuclear Weapons, a couple months ago. It's by this researcher at Stanford named Herb Lin. And essentially, he lays out this concept called NC3, Nuclear Communications Command and Control. And I think that idea is central to the threat that AI poses to our nuclear weapons. And I think that this is also a big reason why we should be anti-nuclear modernization. So nuclear modernization, if you're not aware, it's basically the U.S.'s plan to spend billions of dollars to update our nuclear weapons, infrastructure and the weapons themselves to be more destructive, but also, faster communications and things like that. Anyway, in that book, Dr. Lin sort of lays out this idea that inevitably, as we modernize our nuclear weapons and modernize any sort of technology, as much as we try to keep it off the grid from the internet and AI, they inevitably get closer to the threats of the modern age, right? And that's actually one advantage that we'd like to keep from the fact that all of our nuclear weapons, for the most part, are from the 90s and 80s and the Cold War. Is that they're not connected to the internet, right? Most of them are not. They have old infrastructure. And they aren't, you can't hack them in their current state, at least, to the best of our knowledge, right? But as much modern technology we add to our nuclear infrastructure, the more susceptible we make our nuclear weapons to hacking by both state and non-state actors. So terrorist groups, perhaps could have a hand in creating a false nuclear alert, but also the threat of AI, right? And I think sort of even looking at it from a hardware side, right? Because people also oftentimes think of AI and hacking from a software side of somehow getting to our internet connection or something like that. But also, where do a lot of the semiconductors come from, right? A lot of them come from China and Taiwan. Those are some of the biggest places where our semiconductors and computer chips come from. And based on of course everybody knows the current geopolitical state of the world and our relations, right? It's not a stretch to say that there are risks in adding new technology and new semiconductors and new things to our nuclear weapons infrastructure that could have all sorts of things laid out in them. And people may claim that, oh, there's a very, very small chance of some sort of hacker chip being placed into the Pentagon's the technology the Pentagon purchases. The Pentagon is very good about making sure that their stuff doesn't get hacked, regardless of how low the chance is, right? The potential consequences of either AI or hacker or some sort of chip induced nuclear catastrophe is enough that we would want to avoid that. Right. I mean, I don't need to tell you guys the potential impacts of a nuclear war. But yeah, I think that's a great point to raise, both about AI and technology, and how nuclear modernization just vastly increases both of those risks. And that's why I particularly support that that aspect of Back from the Brink campaign.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, Barb has a question. She's wondering if you could put the link to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the book.
Yep.
On cyber threats. Does anybody else have anything for Rishi? I have a couple of things that I can talk about or ask to inspire some more conversation. But we're also getting close to the top of the hour. Arnie has raised his hand.
Yeah, Rishi, I'm just wondering, did you say you're a junior now?
Yes, I'm a junior in high school. Yeah.
Okay, so I'd love for you to talk about your two things. One is just I'm curious if you're around during the summer and looking for stuff to do and groups to meet with, because we might have some ideas. The other question is maybe you could say a little bit about what you're doing at Exeter to build a group that's going to keep going after you presumably graduate in about a year, because I imagine you're hoping to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. Today was actually some really great progress for that. As I mentioned, we had a Climate Action Day workshop at Exeter, and we were able to, and Dr. Helfand was able to come in and talk about nuclear war to a bunch of students. We were actually able to recruit a bunch of freshmen and sophomores to what we're trying to do. So yeah, absolutely on the continuity front. There's people who are going to be filling in after I graduate. But I'd also like to highlight that the Students for Nuclear Disarmament is both a high school and college level organization. So although I probably won't be in New Hampshire, once I graduate, I'll still definitely be involved in Students for Nuclear Disarmament and running it at the university level. So I'll definitely still be at least virtually quote unquote around the issue. As far as this summer, I'm gonna be as I said, I'm a boarding school student, so I'm probably gonna be in New York at home for most of the summer, and I think I might be visiting some family in California for a bit, but I don't have concrete plans yet now. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question, Arnie. Excuse me. Just looking through the chat to see if there's anything else that I missed. So, Rishi, I was wondering if you could sort of close with some information about how people on the webinar right now can help Students for Nuclear Disarmament and Back from the Brink.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just want to reiterate this petition. I'll send in the chat. I really urge every single person on this call to sign that. If you live in New Hampshire, of course, these little step-by-step things are slowly build up to really great results. But I think the philosophy and sort of idea that I want to leave everybody with today is that young people really are the key to driving this movement. And in my opinion, the missing sort of link to elevating nuclear disarmament to the level of urgency that people have about climate change and nuclear and reproductive rights and gun violence and civil rights, things like that. So I'd encourage you to if there are young people in your communities, whether high school or college students or even recently graduated people, to tell them about this issue. Talk to young people about what what you've learned, share all of your experiences with them, whether you have a crazy Cuban Missile Crisis story like that, or if it's just something that you've been talking about here in New Hampshire Peace Action. And stimulating that dialogue among everybody, but especially young people, is really key. And whatever way you can manifest to do that, I'm sure will be invaluable to what we're trying to do. So thank you so much for the time to speak today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rishi. And quickly, I can add that if you are not from the state of New Hampshire and you're on the webinar, that you can get in touch with me about getting involved with Back from the Brink and what you can do in your locality to effectively advocate against nuclear weapons and for their abolition. I quickly want to mention that outside of the direct student work that Rishi's doing and Back from the Brink is helping out with, there's essentially a network of hubs that Back from the Brink is looking to develop, and we already have 17 of them across the United States. And we have one that's based in New Hampshire. It's the New Hampshire Back from the Brink hub, although I'm certainly open to far more snazzy and jazzy titles for the group. But currently I'm looking for folks to lend a hand. What we're trying to do is to generate a sort of well-synchronized drumbeat of nuclear abolition and disarmament advocacy across the United States. My theory is that if we can get everybody drumming in beat together, that will be much more impactful. So if you want to learn more about being involved with that, you can get in touch with me. I'm going to slap my email address in the chat here in just a second, or you can get in touch with Tim at New Hampshire Peace Action. You could probably reach out to Amy. You could definitely reach out to Will Thomas. I'm happy to learn of the announcement of Will Hopkins' new role as the Executive Director of Veterans for Peace. That's very exciting. And yeah, so please be in touch with Rishi or myself or any of the folks at New Hampshire Peace Action if you want to be of assistance in advocating for the abolition of nuclear weapons and for the implementation of common sense nuclear weapons policy that bring us back from the brink. And
Absolutely.
with that,
Sorry,
I'm
I
gonna
just want to reiterate.
please reiterate.
No, just I'm putting our organization's email in the chat as well. So if you're, particularly on the young person front, thank you so much to Barb for offering those connections in the chat. And if anybody else has similar, even if they're not fully concrete, the next Nobel Peace Prize winning people who are super motivated about this, just any sort of momentum that you can help us build is valuable. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Now, I almost forgot that I'm supposed to officially close this with a script. So many thanks to Rishi and everyone for showing up and being present with us tonight. If you don't I already did that part. So stay in touch with New Hampshire Peace Action at newhampshirepeaceaction.org and on Facebook to learn more about what we're working on and our upcoming programming. Coming up next on Wednesday, April 24th, there's 2 short films on Gaza hosted by Penn at the Red River Theater in Concord. It's the Angel of Gaza and The Present. This was postponed and has been rescheduled for the 24th. On Monday, May 6th, Peace and Justice Conversations is about veterans for the Veterans for Peace Walk for Peace. Will Thomas and Will Hopkins will be in that one, and somebody else whose name I forget. And Monday, May 20th, Peace and Justice Conversations, Israel Palestine Peace Initiatives. That one's co-sponsored by AFSC New Hampshire. This series is free and open to everyone. That said, it would mean a lot to have your support for us and for this series in particular, especially after a difficult financial year. So go to newhampshirepeaceaction.org/donate to make a donation. And please join me in thanking Rishi for the presentation tonight. And I bid you all good evening. Peace and be well, folks.